Are you looking for more out of your life? Do you need ideas on how to start new businesses and how to move forward in your own personal life? Well, guess what? You have come to the right radio show. At You Can Overcome Anything podcast show, you will learn and hear from many people from all walks of life who are sharing their challenges, their stories, the habits, and the mind shifts they had to overcome to become who they are today. On top, you will get a chance to connect and see how you can overcome anything by networking and learning about your next move through this radio show. I present to you our great speakers at You Can Overcome Anything podcast show with your host, Cesar Espino. Hello there and welcome back. It is your friend Cesar Espino. You can find me at www.cesarrespino.com and welcome to another episode of You Can Overcome Anything podcast show. Today I have a special guest. Her name is Nancy Legere. Hey Nancy, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. Before we dive in, let me just give the listeners and viewers a little bit of your background, and that way they can get to know you before we get started. Okay. So Nancy is the author of a wonderful book. It's called Life in the Shadows, which takes the reader through her emotional and psychological struggles of having suffered a rape at the age of 7 years old. Despite that, Nancy learned to accept and relied on the generosity, kindness, and friendship that people extended to her as she got better and recovered from that childhood trauma. Nancy's story is a story of resilience and strength, and it inspires us to reach out for our best selves and live our best lives. Her story is a story we need to read so that we can come out of this pandemic more hopeful and open to a better, more heart-centered future. Wow. I definitely want to hear more of that. And again, thank you for being here and sharing your story with us. And so why don't we start by telling the readers, and I'm sorry, the listeners, more about, your background and, where did you come from and all the good stuff.
Sure. I come from a small town in northern New Brunswick, Canada, of probably at the time had about 10,000 people. I was raised in a family of three siblings, two other siblings. There was three of us,
okay,
and I'm the middle child.
Got it.
So, and I also come from a background. It's a French Acadian background. So that's like big family gatherings all the time, big family parties, home parties. So family is always around, but I also come from a background of family secrets. That's I come from that generation.
Yeah.
And so
wow.
that will set the tone for the story.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so maybe from that perspective, just trying to understand more of, you were just about 7 years old when you had this experience, right? So tell me more about that experience, because I know that anybody, that is going to be listening to this, obviously that's a very devastating experience. And as we go through the interview, you've been able to cope with that and you've been able to recover from that. Take us back to, when that experience took place and how did that even evolve to that?
It was a one-time event. I was raped by a babysitter a male babysitter that we happened to have that evening. And unfortunately that changed what my perception of a normal life would become moving forward, because it was very confusing for me. But in a very short period of time, by the time I went to bed that evening and woke up the next morning, I had already convinced myself that it must have been something that I had done wrong, because that's the only way that I could make sense of it. And there was really nobody really noticed anything, and I just was dressed and went to school the next morning. So from that moment on, everything became very confusing for me. I just couldn't seem to relate to the world around me.
Did you ever think that was like, first, obviously, you were kind of blaming yourself for that happening. it ever crossed your mind that that was normal at that age? Because, obviously, blaming is one thing, and sometimes people may see it as, this is how that should be.
I didn't know.
Okay, got you.
I just didn't know. I couldn't seem to make sense of what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And very, very quickly was able to almost erase it.
Mm.
Like it was a bad dream.
Got it.
It took a few years, but it eventually came back that I didn't feel like I was like everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
almost like I was labeled,
Yeah, right.
that there was something different. And I was also raised Catholic, which didn't help any, because they tend to make you feel like you're the issue, like you've done
Mm.
something wrong. And I actually had a priest tell me that when I was 12 or 13 years old, that
Wow.
I would go to hell for lying, because as a Catholic, you learn to go to confession and all these
Yeah.
things, and I had chosen to speak about it in confession one time, and actually he kind of threw me out of church.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's crazy. That's even crazy to even know that. So
yeah.
so you obviously went to school the next day. Like you said, you kind of erased that. Uh, for how long did you erase that before you came back? And at which point did maybe your immediate family, parents knew about that instance or that experience?
My family never knew anything about it.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. I was into my 50s before I ever even shared it with my family.
Wow.
So it was my secret, and I functioned with it, but I found alcohol at a very young age.
Okay.
By the time I was 12 years old, I had discovered alcohol, and I found that it made me different.
Mm,
It made me feel okay.
right.
So I very quickly became addicted to alcohol.
Yeah.
And by the time I was 14 or 15, I was in a lot of trouble with alcohol. I couldn't function without it. So it was, but it kept me alive.
Mm-hmm.
As
Yeah.
bad as alcohol was, it kept me alive, and stopped me from committing suicide through my teenage years. It got me
Yeah.
through high school.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can only assume, right, that so it came back maybe around your 10, 12 years of age. And a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe in your case, I would say a lot of times people tend to go back to in terms of like maybe drugs or alcohol, because it might numb that pain temporarily, and in your case it kept you going, right? Not that it's a good thing, yet it kind of became a supplement of that trauma or that thing that you were maybe going back to or thinking of, right?
Yeah, yeah. See, I didn't have any coping skills
Got it.
because it happened when I was so young.
Yeah.
So actually, any kind of coping skill, whether it's alcohol or drugs, or would have been a good thing.
That's what became. Yeah, got you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it just carried me until I was able to move on to a different coping skill.
Yeah.
And I sobered up when I was 19 years old. Um, I quit drinking, and I through the help of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Hmm.
But once I did that, then I was flooded with flashbacks and nightmares, and because all of a sudden I was standing there, and my crutch, my coping
Hmm.
mechanism was gone.
Hmm.
So I went into pretty much a major depression, and was hospitalized for being a danger to myself,
Wow.
because I was, of course, thinking of suicide. But that started the cycle of me being able to reach out for help, and finding people that would help me along my journey as I
Yeah.
grew up, basically.
And so during that time, even with you picking up a bottle of booze at the age of 12, and going through all of that, and then the depression, your family didn't question or even have had any idea of what is going on with Nancy? Like none of that came about, and or those conversations were, or you just decided not to even bother if they asked?
Well, I left home at 18,
Okay.
And even prior to that, I mean, my parents knew there was something. They knew there was a drinking or an alcohol problem. But back then it was, oh yeah, well, they'll just grow out of it.
Got
Like
it.
just
Yeah.
that one kid, that middle child that kind of goes a little bit wild, and
Yeah.
she'll grow out of it. So it was never addressed.
Got it.
And by the time I was 18, I left. As soon as I graduated, I left. And I didn't really want to have much to do with my family.
Mm.
I just kind of went my own way, and whenever I was around them, I would pretend that everything was okay. But I also had that ability that people, most of the time, people looking at me would not know there was anything wrong. I
Mm.
came across as very confident, very almost intimidating, to the point where, like, I just wanted people to stay away from me.
Mm.
Like, I have it all together, just leave me alone.
Right. Yeah.
So I was able to hide it really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that that comes to mind is, when this happened to you at the age of 7, that's really just around the time that the mind, and all the things that happen, the habits that are going to be carried over with our lives, throughout, so between the age of 0 and 7 is when we're more responsive to anything. We absorb everything, whether it's good or bad. And in this case for you was, going through this experience. And so unless you find that coping mechanism, which you found it being the alcohol, right? And and you start working on that and start fixing that, you're going to have all these flashbacks, which is what happened to you. And you kind of got those at, at the age of, 18, 19, 20, right? So, um, tell me more about that story. Like, how were you? What were the next years to come after that?
I was, I think I was 22 when I found myself hospitalized in a psychiatric unit. And back then there was very little known about PTSD.
Mm,
And even what they knew about it, it was mostly related to veterans.
got
And
it.
it wasn't talked about because, I mean, we're talking 40 some years ago.
Yeah.
So, it was a totally different world back then. And mental health was certainly not looked at the way it is today. And the people that came into my life at the time, the professionals that I was dealing with, I didn't particularly like them.
Mm,
So I just didn't want to talk to them. And they diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder.
mm,
And basically they just kept me in the hospital for 2 weeks, not medicated. Um, Basically just as a place where I would just kind of reflect on what I was doing or going, and then they just let me go home. And once I left there, I knew that I remember sitting in the psychiatric unit and saying, oh my God, like, you're 2.5 years sober now.
mm,
What is the matter with you? Like, why can't you just get this? You're 22 years old. You have a good job. Why can't you function? Like,
mm.
and that's when I started really looking for help. And it took a while. It took a couple of years before I actually found a psychologist that I liked working with. That I like working with is a funny way of putting it, because I went to see her for 4 years, every 2 weeks. And the first 2 years, I never said a word.
Oh wow. Okay.
I could not, it's like I could not access that part of my brain that contained the trauma,
Yeah.
no matter how hard I tried. It would just not allow me to even look at it or go there. Or so it took a little over 2 years before she was able to gather enough pieces to put together a story, but she still didn't quite know what it was, but she had an idea. So from there, she was able to give me the coping skills that I needed to basically just function until I was ready to do something else. And I was able to function for probably about 15 years before I needed to reach out for help again.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine, going through this. And again, it seems like a lot of it was also, you kept a lot of that hurt, a lot of that experience, a lot of those moments deep down in your life, right? And not really, you know, talking about it for whatever reason. So, like, I can only imagine how you go day by day and continue to live quote unquote what we people consider to be a normal life, right? I don't know if there's such thing as that. Anyways, at the end of the day, though, being part of that community or being part of that society, how do you go about coping with that, and how do you go about actually trying to live a stable life without, I mean, because it's like one of those things, right? You know, during the day you're acting as one person, you go home and you know you're having all these flashbacks or all these memories. I mean, that's how I picture that, right? I just
Yeah.
wanted to get, you know, your opinion on that.
Yeah. Well, so somewheres along the way, I think I was shortly before my 31st birthday. I met someone.
Mm,
I had always told myself I would never be in a relationship because to me, intimacy was not even a possibility.
mm-hmm,
And and I met this person, and we decided to start our life together, but I couldn't quite connect. I could connect on a logical level, but on an emotional level, I had shut it all down. Like it just was not, that was the only way that I could function. So I functioned basically with the logical part of my brain, because as long as it made sense to me, I was okay with it. I could understand it.
right.
And I could understand compassion. I could understand empathy. I could understand all these things, but I couldn't feel them. I had, it made for basically a life of being mostly on an even keel, but no major ups, no downs, no joy, no sadness, just kind of an existence.
Mm,
And for me, I was okay with that at the time. And it just makes for a life where you have very little memories, because emotions are what create memories.
right. Yeah.
So if there's no joy, or if there's no major sadness, you just don't remember it. So I just, but we managed to build a life together. And by the time I hit 50, I thought, oh my God, like I've basically been going through life without experiencing it.
Mm,
And my partner and I, we have 17 years in the difference. Uh, she's my wife now, but
mm-hmm,
she's 17 years older than me. So at 50, she was 67.
mm-hmm,
And we had been together about 15 years by then. And I thought, well, we probably have more years behind us together than what we might have ahead of us. And all of a sudden, it became very important for me to want to be in the moment, because I had grown to love her. She was one of the first people that basically just accepted me for exactly who I was, where I was at that time. Never demanded anything, um, never expected anything other than respect and love. And I grew to love her. And I wanted to know what it was like to be with somebody and feel it and be in the moment. And that's when I decided that I would again go for help. And and I knew that for me, in order to put my life behind me and deal with it, I decided to file a civil lawsuit against the guy that had raped me when I was 7 years old.
oh,
So to
yeah,
me, that would force me to break the secret. It would force me to put it out there, and it would force me to talk about it.
yeah,
Because even at this point, I had never verbalized it.
right, right. Yeah, you
So
were still keeping that inside of you, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So obviously, which is, you know, it's amazing how sometimes the brain or the mind or even what people might be going through, and this could be with anything, right? Maybe we have some listeners that are going through something similar or something different, and they've been keeping that secret to themselves, and a lot of times, you know, like you displayed in your case, you know, I'm, I don't think that's a good thing, right? I would say the sooner you can speak up, the sooner you can say something, the better, and find obviously that comfort. Because for you it was that, and part of that was it was hard to find someone you can trust, someone you can talk to, someone that you feel comfortable with, even when you were talking to your the person that helped you the first time. It took you 2 years to even say something, right? Because you hadn't found that comfort perhaps, and
yeah,
and and then the second time, you know, even with your partner, it took you a lot of years to really come and connect and say, you know what, I feel safe now. I feel like I'm in a better place. I feel like I can definitely open up, and I'm glad you did, because now that had led to a lot of different things. And I guess the maybe the message or the advice or what you just mentioned here is, definitely speak up. I think that there's definitely more to accomplish, and it may not be easy, and definitely it's going to be painful, yet at the end of the day it's going to be better, because for you now you started to experience life in a different whole level, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so and I'm assuming that once you decided to open up and talk about it and do the civil lawsuit, by the way, what happened to that? Did that ever materialize, or
Not really.
okay,
It we're very much in the legal system, not in the justice system.
got it.
And the laws in Canada are certainly very broken when it comes to these cases. It took 3.5 years
Wow.
to get them to just the discovery hearing stage. They just kept putting stuff off over and over again for stupid reasons. And eventually, in October of 2018 is when we had our first discovery. And it was 2 days of just, to me, pure stupidity, like anything to waste time. There was not really anything there that brought anything. After we were done with this discovery hearing, we had a bunch of stuff that the other side wanted, like my report cards and like just
Dumb stuff.
pure stupidity, like just to waste money and to waste time. And we ended up pushing their hand a bit and deciding to go for what we call here a summary judgment, which is for the courts to basically judge our case on all the information that had been provided, because we had provided all of my medical records. All of the therapists that I had seen had provided reports, and they came back at us with a vengeance. They started this. They put in a motion to go to court to get all of my client records, actually, from the psychiatrist and psychologist that I had seen through the years. They wanted all of their personal notes. They wanted absolutely everything. And I mean, you go to therapy because they tell you that whatever you say there is confidential. It'll never leave that room. Well, that's not quite true. It really isn't. Yeah. Here in Canada, they can have access to that information. Whether it relates to the case in question or not, it doesn't matter. So that made me really uncomfortable. And then they came back at us for, they were going to start adding people to the list that they wanted to interview, even though they had absolutely nothing to do with the case. Like they were going to drag my parents into it. And I mean, my dad is in his 80s, my mom is in her late 70s. And so I just kind of started to grow a little bit uncomfortable with where the case was heading. Right. And my lawyer called me in December and said that, even if we win this motion that we had in January, it meant that our summary judgment was pushed back and would probably drag this case on for another 2 years. And we had already been into it for 4.5 years now.
Wow.
So, and he said, like, even if we win a judgment at the end of 2 or 3 years, then it's another legal process to try to claim that judgment. And he said, more than likely, he said, there probably won't be anything left because he's not that well off. So I just decided that by this time, I had written my book. I had published my book. The book came because I needed to know what my story was. Because I had never spoken about hardly anything. And this court trial gave me access to all of my medical records, which gave me timelines.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Because anytime anybody ever asked me something, I would say, oh, probably 2-3 years ago, but it could have been 5. I have no perception of time. So that gave me timelines, and I needed to know how to tell my story because I had never talked about it.
Yeah.
And that's how the book started. It started basically as a therapy tool. And after 3 years of writing, I pulled it all together, got an editor, and published it
Yeah. So
because that's how I was able to share my story with people.
right, yeah. So let me ask you about that. Actually, I'm curious to know because I think it's a very interesting title, "Life in the Shadows." Right? What does that um, represent to you in the mix of the whole story? Right?
It's funny because years ago, people used to find my story interesting because I would talk a little bit about, especially in AA, they, like what my life
Hmm.
had been like. And so people were intrigued by my story, although I always left the sexual abuse out of it. But, and for the longest time, I always had that in the back of my mind. If I ever write a book, the title will be Life in the Shadows,
Hmm.
because my entire life was hidden. It's
Mm,
like it's like I was in the shadows all the time.
yeah.
It was never, what you saw was never who I was.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
who I thought you wanted me to be.
Right. Yeah, and that actually makes perfect sense, right? I mean, now that I think about it, you're always kind of hiding, you know, underneath and below everything that was at the surface, below everything that was going on, right? You were
Yeah.
hiding under the drinking, you were hiding under not talking about your kids, you were hiding in all those different aspects, and so that makes sense. You were living life under the shadows, and so obviously, this has been a long journey for you, right? And you kind of touch a little bit on why you decided to finally say, you know what, enough is enough. I want to get more of that that transformation, that moment where that pivotal moment where you say, you know what, um, this is not the life I want to live for the rest of my life, right? And so because I think that a lot of people get stuck on that. I mean, again, they might even look at the suicidal route, or they might be looking at, well, I'm going to accept this for what it is, and I'm always going to be doing drugs or drinking or whatever the case may be, right? And there is, you were talking about there is hope to recover and heal, right? So I want to know more about that aspect.
Oh yeah. I think that's a lifelong process.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we make decisions throughout that may not, in the eyes of other people, may not be very good for us. But if it keeps you alive long enough to get you to the next step, then it's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I see my life. I've been so fortunate, like throughout my entire life, to have people there. They would just appear when I was at my most desperate places. And and I write about them a lot in my book because I think it was important to
Mm-hmm.
honor them. And that I can go as far as even like I remember my grade 4 teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, grade 4 and grade 8 are the only two teachers that I remember. The rest of them, I have no clue who they were. I can't remember them.
Mm-hmm.
But in grade 4 was the very first time that I remember feeling safe after that had happened. She had given me a safe environment. And it wasn't because she was treating me any differently than anybody else. It was just the way that she was and how she had that ability to make each and every one of us feel safe and feel smart and feel okay about ourselves. But I've had that throughout my life in different places. And like at the worst, at the height of my drinking, I had people take me in that I didn't know who they were. They didn't know me from a hole in the ground, but they would take me in. They could see that there was something there worth saving.
And they didn't have to,
And
right? They didn't have to, yet they saw something that you couldn't see. And sometimes, that's actually a good point, and I want to bring that up. Sometimes in our life journey, it takes somebody else to see your true potential that you cannot even see for your own self, right? And
yeah,
sometimes it's those people that are going to help you, they're going to rescue, they're going to hand over, some help or something. And again, you're like, I don't see it, I don't understand it, I don't know what this is all about. Yet again, it takes that person or somebody else to see that. And sometimes it's good to embrace that. It's good to take that for what it is and say, okay, if they're seeing that, then that means there's something better and bigger for me to do in whatever it is. and maybe I need to start looking at that route. I need to start entertaining that aspect of my life, right?
Yeah. And plus, we truly don't know the impact that we can have on somebody's life.
Mm.
You just, because I've reached out to some of these people since I've decided to write my book, because I personally wanted to thank them for the
Wow.
impact that they had had in my life. And most of them just kind of, they were shocked, like they just didn't realize. And a small example was, I had had a surgery. I had injured my back in my early 20s and had a surgery. And the whole thing was a bit of a mess. And my surgery was 2.5 hours from where I lived.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there by myself. And when I went there, I didn't know that I was going for surgery. I thought I was just going for a consultation. Anyways, that evening, when I was admitted to the hospital and was waiting for the surgeon to come, he finally came, and I'm 22, 23 years old, and he's telling me that, there's a 50-50 chance that you may not walk again. Well, how's a 22-year-old going to react to that?
Wow. Yeah.
And there was nobody there for me to talk to. And all of a sudden, this lady is at the door of my hospital room. And she came in and I recognized her. She was the mother of a friend of mine back home, and they had moved to this city.
Mm.
And all she did is she came in, she sat down, she chatted with me probably 15, 20 minutes, and she changed my entire perception of what it was going to be like moving forward. But she never, ever realized the impact that she had on me that day. Like,
Yeah.
it just, and because that's what she did, she volunteered and she went around the hospital to talk to people to try to make them feel better. She didn't come in there because she knew I was there. I don't think she even knew who I was.
Mm.
But my entire life has been filled with people like that.
Yeah.
And I'm so blessed to be able to even see that. And, and that's why now when anywhere I go, anybody that I meet, I try to consciously acknowledge them, to let them know that they matter, because nobody knew when I was walking around and I was suicidal, that if they said hello to me, it would make me maybe not go home and kill myself that day. So you have an impact and you just don't know it. So anybody, like anytime I go somewhere, if I can catch somebody's eye, I will acknowledge them just to let them know that they matter.
Right.
And it may save their life for that day.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, you just never know what people might be going through. They might be on the surface level, like your book kind of says, you live in the shadows. On the surface level, it might seem like everything's fine, yet deep down something might be going down. And again, like you said, even just that conversation in the hospital with you changed your whole perspective, and you're like, okay, there's a bigger purpose at that point, right? And so yeah, that's actually a pretty I think good thing to do, and good practice overall to do. And I love that you try to definitely on the conscious level be there for people in one form or the other, right? So that's pretty amazing to go through that. In terms of, you had something here that I was reading, and it says, and I want to know what this really means to you. So what does it mean to have the power of meaningful human connection?
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, you just don't know. Like, we're so used to this technology today that I think we lost that ability to connect with people, because everything is either done by text or email, and I mean, we can get away with stuff through email and text that we would never ever dare try to even do if we were face to face with people,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no consequence. We don't see the emotion of the person that we're talking to. And you need people. You need people. Yeah, and you need to, I mean, even if it's a virtual connection, it's a connection.
Right.
And we need to know it. That's what tells us that we're not alone, and that everybody makes a difference. And especially at a time like right now,
Mm-hmm.
we see how much people make a difference, from as from as far down as the cashier to the doctors. Like everybody has a role to play, and everybody is as important as the next person, because without one, the chain is broken.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, it's, I just, for me, a meaningful connection is to be in the moment, to feel what is happening, to know what is happening around me, to pay attention, and not just to run that rat race where 5 years down the road, you wake up and you say, oh yeah, I'm successful because, I've grown my business and I have a Mercedes in the driveway, but there's nothing in between it. You've lost those 5 years because there's nothing in it.
Yeah.
And I don't want that.
Yeah. No, and that's actually another great point. Is definitely appreciating, being grateful, being connected with other people. Because again, at the end of the day, good or bad, we have both good and bad people. And at the end of the day, I'm also part of the belief that the more connections you make, the more of that. Because again, you just never know who you can help. And part of the reason why we're doing this interview too is just I know for a fact that there might be somebody out there listening to this or watching this video that is going to look at this story, is going to look at your story, and they're going to be like, she did it. She gave me hope. She gave me that ability. And it could have been just one word, one phrase, one sentence that can change somebody else's life, right? And so that's the whole purpose of being able to do and get our message out and help other people. So I really, really enjoy that. So what's are the next things for you? You have your book. Is there any other additional purpose in terms of you being able to get your story out and really empower people through that story? What is in your crystal ball?
Well, I'm just getting used to with the podcast. Like for me, that's kind of dipping my toes in the water and seeing if I'm comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
So I haven't really looked anywhere beyond that. Like I don't see myself as a speaker or as a circuit speaker, going across the country. And just because for me, my story is by no means unique. I've had so many people reach out and say, oh my God, you're telling my story. And all I wanted to do with this book was to open the conversation, to start the conversation, and to break the cycle of all these secrets, and to let everybody know that together we can heal. We can do it as long as we just keep trying. We'll get there.
Yeah. So Nancy, I really had a great time with you. I have a couple more questions for you before I let you go. The first one is, if people wanted to connect with you, where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And Life in the Shadows also has a Facebook page.
Oh, awesome.
And I can be reached at either place.
Okay, good. And you've obviously given us a lot of great information. What would be one thing you can tell and leave with the listeners that they can really overcome anything in their life if they were to put that into practice now?
You can't do it alone. You cannot do it alone. You can try, but you cannot do it alone. And for me, what keeps me grounded today is that I make sure that every morning I take 5-10 minutes. I have a setup in my backyard where I feed the birds and I feed the squirrels and I feed the chipmunks, and I make sure that I go out there and actually enjoy doing what it is that I'm doing. And right now it's so eerily quiet because everybody is in lockdown that you can actually hear almost every sound. And I love practicing listening to that because it means that my senses are open. So just by doing that makes the day that much more enjoyable, that much more possible. So I try to do that every day.
Got it. And then besides doing that, are there any other habits that you do on a daily basis that just help you stay positive and continue to move forward in life?
I'm not one of these people that can sit there and meditate every day. I'm one of these people that I do what I need to do when I need to do it.
Okay.
I wouldn't say hate having to do these things.
Yeah.
But I would much like it if I could just get up in the morning and get going and not have to do any of these things. But at times I do have to stop and slow down and do a little bit of meditation and do a little bit of thinking and have a look at what's going on. But I don't do it on a regular basis, no.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Well, Nancy, I had a really good time hearing your story and definitely connecting with you. And, I want to just say thank you for coming on the show and sharing this with us.
Oh, you're so very welcome. And thank you for sharing your platform with me.
Yeah, definitely. And for the rest of you guys, do me a favor. Make sure you check out her book, Life in the Shadows. Please comment, share this podcast interview, and, stay tuned for the next episodes. Really looking forward to seeing you guys on the next episode. Have a good day. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cesar Espino, real estate investor, business coach, and consultant, and author of the book, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. My number is 424-501-6046. In my book, I talk about making the necessary changes to shift your mind for prosperity and certainty. Pick up your copy at Amazon. I also love helping families with their real estate and can purchase your house fast and all cash. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. My number is 424-501-6046.
Thank you for having me today. I am so glad you tuned in to this podcast. You can find me at Spreaker.com, where you can like and subscribe. And to learn more about myself and my services, you can find me at www.cesarrespino.com, or you can also find me at Facebook under Cesar R. Espino. Once again, thanks for joining me. I am looking forward to having you at the next episode, and know that you truly can overcome anything.